following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back talking sports in the zone. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Network, and I have two of the mavens with me today. George Case III. Hello, George.
Hi, everybody.
And David Hubler on Yom Kippur.
Yeah, yes. Always reminds me of a fish.
Right. Some people think gefilte fish is a holiday. So, wer weist. But a pleasant one. Let's make it a good talk. We're going to talk 2019 playoffs. It's been exciting thus far, and more so for the Washington Nationals, your team, David Hubler, and I'm sure your team too, George Case. You follow them as closely as anyone else.
Well, yeah, Ralph and David. I am excited by the success Washington's had. And, a friend of ours, Ronnie Rabinovitz, I mean, he's a Dodgers fan. So, you've got that potential series there. You got the Dodgers and the Nationals are tied up. And, if whoever wins the thing, they might wind up going to the World Series.
Absolutely. David, why don't we start with you because it is your holiday. Talk about your Senators, your Nationals this year, and what you're impressed with, what you're disappointed in, what's going on in Washington.
Washington is really going nuts. It's unfortunate that they have to go out to the West Coast now to play the one game because the fans have just been coming out in droves. They've even sort of managed to push the firing of the Redskins head coach off the front page of the sports pages for a time being.
That just happened. Yes, David, that happened yesterday, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. But they knew about it Monday night. It sort of broke Monday night.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say Gruden was sort of a lame duck, though. I mean, everybody expected him to get the axe, and of course, when the team's not performing, that's one of the first things that happens. You fire the coach or the manager. That's it.
Right. Yeah. It's
a very
been
intense family, the Grudens. I know Oakland has his brother as coach,
right,
on his second round with them, and I don't know. They just seem like they're very tightly strung.
Well, what's his name? The other Gruden, the Oakland coach. He was on television football broadcast for a couple of years, and I guess he got the itch to get back into coaching again because he was a very effective announcer and analyzing the color guy, analyzing plays and all that kind of stuff. What was going on? I'm not a football guy, but I always enjoyed listening to him, trying to learn a little bit more about the inside of the game.
That occurs to me to ask David and you about Dusty Baker and his qualifications. And do you think he'll manage again? Do you think he'll manage the Mets again? Or Mets for the first time?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I didn't know he had managed the Mets at all.
Yeah.
That's one of the most precarious positions in all of sports. Being fired like that is so easy to do. And these guys walk away with, a year or two salary in their pocket. So they're not hurting financially, any of them. But I think
a year or two salary is to us
a couple of million,
a lifetime's.
They
could walk.
It becomes a big ego thing, David and Ralph.
Sure.
Those guys, they, as David said, they walk away with a big fat bank account, and probably they're going to be hired, a short period of time later. But that's been the nature of the beast. I mean, they give a manager a 4 or 5 year contract or whatever it is. It doesn't work out. They sever the cord, and all of a sudden they owe them a lot of money.
Yeah, one of the big differences is that between the two sports, it's much harder to bring in a new football head coach because of the type of play that the team is used to. This may be a totally different type of playing style. You've got so many additional coaches, defensive coaches, offensive coaches. Whereas in baseball, I mean, the game is the game. I mean, there are a great deal of subtle changes on how you deal with the pitchers, how you set up your lineup, things like that. But the game is the game. You don't have the kind of is it a passing offense or is it a running offense? Baseball is baseball. So it's a little easier to find a new manager who cannot make huge changes in the way the game is played on the field. They can make changes that we don't even know about. Billy Martin was a tough guy to get along with. Some say he was, a racist. He couldn't change the nature of the game to a great extent. He liked a good running game. He was supposedly awful with how he dealt with his pitchers. But still, the game was played between the lines, as they say. In football, it's a whole different story. I mean, a head coach there has a whole comes in with a huge playbook, and he brings in his associate coaches. So it changes the whole. Plus, how they draft in the NFL, they draft for a specific type of game, a running game or a passing game, that sort of thing. So it's quite a different animal. To find new head coaches. But one thing you got to say for the Redskins, I mean, Dan Snyder, he's gone through a zillion. He's the George, what's his name? George Steinbrenner. Yeah.
Steinbrenner.
He's not well liked. I mean, he's just a nasty human being, and he's ruined that whole franchise. It's 20 years since they actually won anything.
Yeah.
David, have they I haven't followed it. Have they announced a replacement for Gruden?
No.
Okay.
They're taking one of the assistant coaches is acting head coach.
Yeah. As an acting coach, right?
Yeah, and they're going to just continue to play the way they've been, and then in fact I think this week they're playing the Patriots, so they're not going to get their first win there.
Yeah.
Okay, I have two things. One of them I'd like George. I'd like you to chip in on this. It's my guess that the closest big league manager that you've ever been around was Mickey Vernon. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely correct.
How did managing affect him? It's the highest pressure job, coaching football, managing baseball. You're in an absolute under a microscope every day. You knew him before, you knew him during, and you knew him after he managed. Tell me about.
Yeah, well, let me just say this, Ralph. Mickey Vernon was a very close personal friend of our family. I knew him from the time I was a little boy. He was always a gentleman. He was always very quiet.
He was your Uncle
Mickey. Yeah, right. He was. He was my Uncle Mickey. When Mickey was hired as the manager of the Senators, he had to put together a coaching staff. So he went to my dad as his base running third base coach, and he went to Sid Hudson, another Washington teammate, as his pitching coach. And then he hired George Soucy and and Raleigh Hemsley as the other two coaches. So that was their coaching staff. But they knew going in that they really didn't have the on-the-field talent. They had a bunch of aging veterans, and the first 60 days of the season they were playing 500 ball, and they were excited. But Mickey and my dad and Sid were realists and knew that eventually the wheels were going to fall off, and they did. They lost over 100 games the first season, 100 and some games the second season, and then the third season, Mickey was let go after about the first 2 months, and Gil Hodges was brought in. And, Gil could do as much as he could do, but again, there was very little talent. But as far as being a gentleman, Mickey was always that way. He was very quiet, very reserved, but he knew how to handle players. He knew how to handle the press. And there wasn't a lot of pressure on Washington back then. They were happy to get a team, but on the other hand, the fans, as David will attest, they weren't real happy with what was on the field compared to what had left, becoming the Minnesota Twins, who were building into a powerhouse.
Right.
So, Mickey did the best he could with what he had. But, you ask about his personality, Ralph, and the kind of person that he was before, during, and after. And to me, Mickey was always the same. I could count on him. He was a very, very good friend, but a very sound baseball man who knew going in that it was going to be a tough job because they really didn't have the talent to make it work.
What were his players like? Were there any rebels? I mean, if you look at the Angels of that expansion era, you had Bo Belinsky and
right.
what have you.
Yeah, that's a good question, Ralph. I can't point to any personalities like Bo, who I happen to know because he was from Trenton, New Jersey, the same city my dad was from, and was known as a pool shark, rather than a baseball player when he was a kid growing up. But on the other hand, the second year that Washington was there, probably the most controversial player they had was Jimmy Pearsall.
Right.
Oh, yes. An enigma of a guy.
Well, Jimmy was tremendous talent, but he had certainly some issues, and as going when he went, I think it was when he went to the Mets. I mean, he ran the bases backwards after hitting his 100th home run and getting in a lot of arguments. And matter of fact, I think I saw a thing where he ran in from center field. I don't know whether it was Washington or whether it was with the Mets, to dispute a ball strike call by the umpire. How he could see from center field, but that was his makeup, and he was very fiery and mercurial. But of all the players that I met with those couple teams with Washington, I'd say he was the one that stood out the most in my mind about being, somewhat controversial.
And he was, for all his craziness, he was one talented ball player.
Yes, he was.
Especially defensively, he ranked right up there with the greats.
No, he's very fast. He was very quick. They had him playing center field, and he was a good player. A couple of the other players that with Washington, Gene Woodling. Gene was an aging veteran who actually was my dad's roommate with Cleveland in 1946, and here's Woodling, playing for Washington with my dad as the third base coach 15 years later. And the other player who was very highly thought of, but again aging, was Dale Long. Dale Long was the Washington first baseman. I think he had set a record, I think when he was with the Cubs or
Pittsburgh
Pirates, I'm not sure what it was. He hit home runs in like 7 or 8 consecutive games.
I think that was with the Yankees.
Maybe it was with the Yankees.
Yeah.
My memory's escaping me on that, David, as far as what team.
Sure.
But I remember the circumstances, and he came in Washington. He probably had the most power of anybody they had on that ball club, and they were counting on him. But Dale was a rather quiet guy, not real boisterous, and Danny O'Connell was another one. He was an infielder. Billy Klaus. I mean, they were all pretty much the same mold. They were all happy to be playing, but they were getting up in years, and a ball player only has a certain amount of years in his career, and then they have to look elsewhere. Right. Yep.
How about Hinton? He was kind of a rookie, I guess, on that early Washington team. Hinton?
Chuck Hinton?
Chuck Hinton.
Yeah, good memory.
No, Chuck Hinton was a terrific ball player. I knew Chuck. I've met Chuck a couple different times, and he had been later on. He was a longtime baseball coach at Howard University. But Chuck was a very good talent. When he came to the expansion center, he hadn't really made much of a major league career up until that point, but started to prove himself. He could hit, he could run, he could throw. And he fit in, but again, Chuck was quiet and reserved, and he let his ability speak for itself out on the field. He was not controversial at all, as far as I remember.
Okay, good memories, I'm sure.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, can I correct you, David Hubler? I don't think Billy Martin was a racist. He might have been anti-Semitic, but I don't.
Well, that doesn't count.
No, that counts, of course. But I don't think he was anti-black. And I get this from Lenny Randall. I've done many, many podcasts with him, and he talks about Billy Martin in such high esteem.
Oh, that's interesting. Where I got my information from, of course, I never met Billy Martin. I certainly didn't play for him, but there was a long article in Sports Illustrated. I guess it was at the beginning of the season. It was all about what was the team? Let's see, 69 team, I guess it was. And because it was like one of these, retrospective of the club like when the Bronx was burning and all that sort of stuff that was going on with the team and Billy Martin, and several of the people who were quoted in the article did make the comment that he was an out and out racist. So that's if you could very well be correct. I was just going by what I read in the newspapers, as they say.
Okay, I know he and Reggie did not get along.
Right,
but
we all knew that.
They sure did. They sure did not get along. You're absolutely right about that.
But I don't think you had to be a racist not to get along with Reggie.
I agree. Anyway, I mean, sure, I could stand corrected.
Okay, I mean, if everybody has racist moments, nobody is purely or racist thoughts and this, that, and the other thing. I don't think his was. I think he was colorblind, just based on what Lenny Randall said, and.
Well, he certainly would know, certainly better.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was an enigma, like I say, an enigma of a guy. This was so complicated in so many different levels, coming from abject poverty, not without a father figure, basically in his life. I think he came a long way. He had a battle for everything he had, and we're all human. He had demons, and God bless him, rest in peace. He was as competitive a guy as you'll ever meet
Yeah, he reminded me a lot of Leo DeRocha in his, in his style of play and managing. I mean, it was all out, he was all out. You had to play for him 110%.
Right.
And DeRocha was like that too. He's the one who coined that term, right? Nice guys finish last.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, David. That was his phrase, right?
Right. Yeah. So
and he meant it too. He just had no use for anybody who didn't hustle and didn't try. They both shared that in common.
Yeah, I wonder what they would have thought of Manny Machado, the great star who opts out of running to first base occasionally.
What would they say to the entire generation of players today? It isn't just Manny Machado. It's just different than it was.
Absolutely.
Well, I think if I can chime in here, I think part of it is the amount of money in the long-term contracts and the free agency. I mean, these guys, they're looking out for themselves, and Machado might be with the team 1 year, and Alan Blumkin would talk about a rent-a-player and all that kind of stuff. That's the way it was, and the way the game has become. Where in an earlier era, the players were there. A lot of the players and the managers were close, and I think it's a different world now. It really depended also, though, on the personality of the managers. I mean, you had guys like we're talking about Billy Martin and DeRocha. I mean, they were fiery, competitive. They didn't give a damn, pardon my French, about anything other than winning. And you better be out there to play. And I think that was part of the problem with Martin and Reggie. I mean, Reggie was Reggie. He was a huge ego, and he was going to do whatever he wanted. And he and Martin, they clashed quite often. And the one thing I remember, and I've met Reggie a couple different times, but the one thing I remember was that dugout confrontation between Reggie and Martin that the whole world saw.
Yeah. Who could forget that?
Yes. He went out to get him, too. He just waiting for him when he came in, when he didn't think he hustled that time.
Right.
And interesting, when I look back at films of that in the dugout, it was Elston Howard that came between them, and he was a guy that lived his whole life a Yankee, so to speak, and went through 2 or 3 different regimes under Martin as coach, never got a chance to manage, and his former wife, his widow, says that literally led to his early death. He died of a broken heart. So,
that applies also to Willie Randolph. Randolph always wanted to manage the Yankees, and they all, and according to what I've read, he did have the wherewithal to be an astute manager, and he never got the chance.
Yeah, he was a Met manager and a good one, and it was sad that he didn't get a chance with the Yankees. Mattingly is another one. I thought he'd end up as Yankee manager.
Yeah, that's true. He seems fairly happy in Miami.
He became extended, or they extended his contract, from what I understand. He'll be back.
Ralph and David, can I ask a question? Ralph, you mentioned Dusty Baker, and I wanted to ask David. Dusty Baker was highly thought of, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't he, as a manager in Washington?
He was especially among the fans. The fans really liked Dusty Baker, and the problem apparently was that Baker would have nothing to do with the same things we don't want to have anything to do with. These advanced statistics, I mean, the what are they? All these whip and
analytics.
all these analytics. He played the game the way he played the game, and he managed the way he played the game. And he felt, I guess, that was enough. He didn't have to go. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of managers today, several of whom are retiring or have just retired, that don't want to rely on this, to supersede their authority and their instincts as managers.
Right.
Yeah, and they don't want a general manager who manages from the press box and will call down and have decisions made, what have you.
Oh yeah, that's true too.
Okay.
That was another thing that changed.
That's a big issue. That's a big issue with managers. The way it used to be, I mean, managers back in an earlier time, I mean, they were baseball men, and everybody was pretty much on the same page, using strategy or pitchers or whatever you want to do. But today, and you guys are absolutely correct, sabermetrics have taken over. And if a manager wants to manage the way he'd like to manage, by the instinct or his baseball experience, all of a sudden, somebody who's a Harvard MBA is telling him that the computer printout tells him that he should be doing this rather than that. And that's a huge problem for managers today.
Yeah, it might have even been a Rutgers MBA.
Speaking of Rutgers, and let me just throw this out. Speaking of Rutgers and changes of the guard and all that kind of stuff, they just fired the Rutgers football coach.
Oh, really?
After a 1-4 start last week, and they replaced him with his assistant. But the Rutgers football coach will walk away with $8.8 million in salary.
Oh, God.
Because he had signed a 5-year contract that had just been given an extension. So, the only stipulation being that he's supposed to be actively going out and looking for another football job. But we talked about money and everything else. I mean, there's an example.
Yes, exactly. Think of what they could do with $8 million. Yeah, $8 million on a campus.
Right.
That's enough for a couple of hundred endowments.
Yeah.
If they just gave him an extension, what did he do so egregious to be fired? Knowing that they
Ralph, what they did, what was led to the cause of his firing? It wasn't anything, as far as anything bad, except that the team couldn't win. They were 1-4, and they were shut out. One game 52-0, another game 40-0, and so that led to the firing because they had absolutely no offense at all, and they're playing in the Big Ten, and they became a laughingstock of the Big Ten because of their futility on the field.
Yeah, it's the old adage: you can't fire 50 players or 25 players or whatever.
That's it. You fire the coach. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Of course, that sort of dooms the season completely when you try to bring in, like we've talked about, how football differs from baseball. But bringing in a new head coach in the middle of the season, which is just about where it is, dooms the rest of the season to
No, it does, David. It does, and they play. They play the next 8 games, of which they have games against Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State. And people are saying, I wonder if they're even going to be able to field enough players to go out against these guys because they know they're going to get destroyed on the field.
Yes, yeah.
And there's another thing that's being held back, and that's recruiting.
Right.
So you change coaches, you get guys, all the assistant coaches who are out there talking to families and what have you. You're going to lose your blue chippers that way.
Yeah, well, that you're absolutely right, Ralph. That is a problem, and Rutgers has to face with that. And now they're talking about who are they going to bring back, and they're talking about possibly bringing back Greg Schiano, who had led Rutgers to some pretty good seasons when he was there. Left Rutgers to go to Ohio State, and then he went to the Patriots for about a 4-week period and resigned. And the thought was that he had been told that he's going to get the offer for the Rutgers job again. Whether or not that's going to happen, I have absolutely no idea. I'm only looking at it from someone who went to the school and knows some of the people. But, that what David was saying, though, that is a huge issue. And what you're saying about recruiting, the fact is that football coaches, they have a whole staff. They have, almost position coaches. And some of these guys are dependent upon the head coach keeping them on. Well, if the head coach is an acting or an interim head coach they have right now, and they're going to bring a new guy in, he's going to fire all those guys and bring in his own staff.
That's right.
It's a huge issue, a lot more complex in football. And David, as you're talking about, a lot more complex to my thinking than baseball.
And
sure.
Also, the kids that are recruited, do they want to play for the new coaching staff?
Right.
Because chances are that the new coaches will play the guys that they recruit. That's natural.
Right.
So there's the transfer thing. Can a guy transfer? Does he lose eligibility if when he transfers? If his coach leaves, that's a good question, I think.
Well, no, it is, Ralph. It's a real question, and I was talking about Rutgers because I'm closest to it, but I mean that's part of the entire world that college football is today. Is that a lot of these blue chip recruits, or a lot of the recruits that they have coming in, they were recruited by the guy who's running the show, and if he's gone, some of them now what they do, they have a new rule. They have what they call a transfer portal, and a player can redshirt. In other words, he can play. He can redshirt for he can play 4 games during the season. Redshirt, decide he's going to transfer to another school because he doesn't want to play for whoever's coming in. And these schools now, like a Rutgers, they're looking for talent that they're having trouble getting, because the whole thing is so uncertain. And if you're a young kid being recruited, the Penn States, the Michigans, the Notre Dames, and all those major colleges, Ohio State, they're going to go to a kid and say, why the heck would you want to go to Rutgers? You don't even know who the head coach is.
And in 3 years out there where Ralph is, college athletes are going to get paid.
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah.
Nice.
So there's going to be a Westward Ho movement among talented football and basketball players to attend college in California.
Yeah.
I
think that I think that's going to happen. I think that's going to happen. There is going to be some of that, but I really think, and we've talked about this before, I think at some point college athletes are going to be paid for the use of their likeness and all that other kind of stuff, where the schools are benefiting by their performance and blah, 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 but all of a sudden the kid says, hey, the NCAA or the school is making all this money off my back. I want to get a few bucks myself. And I really think that at some point, I don't think it's going to go Division IIs or IIIs or any of that. I think it might be a top 20 football program or a top 10 basketball program, and however the NCAA is going to do it. But I think these kids are going to wind up getting some money.
And that could be the ruination of the sports, too.
Well, it can be.
Yeah.
It can be.
Yeah. It's already semi-pro ball. Let's face it.
Well, yeah. I mean, even you look back at the history of the Olympics. Supposedly, all the amateurism in the Olympics. Well, whatever it was, whatever year that the Russians beat the Americans in basketball, when they kept going and going and going until they finally got the clock and they were able to do it. So then, America says, hey, we're not going to let the Russians do this, so we're going to put the dream team together with some of the best professional basketball players in the world, making millions of dollars playing for the United States Olympic team in basketball.
Yeah, that was after the Russians beat.
The whole spirit of amateurism.
Oh, it does. It has already.
Right.
I mean, for years now. But I mean,
Yep.
they did that after the Russians, the Soviets, beat the U.S. in basketball, which
Right.
was always
with that referee call that was bogus.
Yeah. The
No,
referee was
that's the
from
game.
Bulgaria, I think, if I remember
that's
correctly.
the game I was referring to. Right.
Yeah.
They kept extending it, saying they let them go and here's these college kids, and I knew some of them, they're out there playing against the pros, and eventually the Russians won after about 2 or 3 different tries to win. They finally won. So on the other hand, you can look at 1980 ice hockey, that the miracle on ice. I mean, however we did it was incredible, that we took a bunch of college kids and beat the Soviet national team in hockey in 1980 Olympics.
Yep.
And then they turn around and go pro themselves after that great win because it was amateur. They just piss all over the idea of it and go pro. That's bad.
I think just about every one of those amateur, college players on that hockey team, I think just about every one of them on the starting team, signed a National Hockey League contract the next year.
Yeah, and only a couple of them really stuck. I think the goalie had a couple of years. And,
Jim Craig, right?
Yeah,
and Ruzioni and a few of those guys.
Yeah. They, all in all, they were terrific amateur team, but you couldn't have built an NHL team around any of these guys.
Well, no, David, you're right. And most of those kids were, say, American-born kids. I mean, you look at the NHL and the number of Canadian hockey players. I mean, that's where the bulk of them come from. And now, of course, they've opened it up. So now you got a lot of, Soviets are playing American hockey because they're going to make a lot of money. And, money has certainly changed the whole nature of the game, and not only hockey. I mean, it's done it in basketball, baseball, football, whatever. I mean, the amount of money today is so huge, it's hard for the average person to comprehend the kind of money that these guys are making. And not only, their contracts, but their endorsements are huge.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's
I
true.
don't begrudge the individual player for that, though.
Oh, no. Absolutely not.
No, most people would not. One other thing I wanted to mention was that when we were talking about the different eras, and you mentioned general managers, Griffith had no general manager. He was the general manager. And a lot of the teams did not really have general managers, and they certainly didn't have to work with players' agents. That was a big difference, too. A lot of these guys who came up to sign a contract, they were more than happy to sign a contract to play Major League Ball, even if it was just for $6,000, $8,000, $7,000 for the season. And they, granted they didn't have many rights to protest, but a lot of them just didn't have, frankly, the education to buck the ownership.
Well, they didn't, David, and that was the result. I mean, when they had the reserve clause, those players were pretty much bound to that team.
Right.
Once free agency started, then they go to the highest bidder and the long-term contracts and all that kind of stuff. So, absolutely, Ralph, I agree with you and David. Players, I don't begrudge them at all. I mean, if somebody's willing to pay them that kind of money, then by God, take the money, because that's what it's become. But on the other hand, it's changed the whole nature of sports in the fact that money is driving all the major sports, football, basketball, baseball, hockey. You look at the TV contracts, all the marketing stuff that goes on, and these players, they're getting huge amount of money, but the endorsements now, I can tell you what has been told to me many times. Michael Jordan, to give you an example, with his Air Jordan, he was making more money with his endorsement with Nike than he was being paid by the Chicago Bulls.
Mm.
Oh, sure.
Speaking of money, there was a very interesting article, and it really got my dander up. because it's one of my big bugaboos, and ours too on the show. I think it was Tom Boswell or one of the Post sports writers was talking about the contracts that are given out to the leagues by ESPN, MSL, all of these different Turner, and the contracts specifically state that after the playoff round, like after the Series of 5, they are not allowed to have any games played during the day. They all must be played at night. And we've all talked about how, it would be nice to have some of the games on the weekends played during the day or the kids could get to see these games. Contracts prohibit in the very language that you cannot put on a major league postseason game during the daytime.
David, I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
Didn't read Boswell's article, but
I think
to me, there again, it's the tail wagging the dog. If that's true.
It is true. I mean, I guess it's true because these guys do a lot of digging. But when I meant it is true. It is the tail wagging the dog. There's no question about it.
Right.
And the hardest part, if you were like me and you were trying to watch the Yankees playoff and the Nats playoff, you didn't know what channel they were on. I mean, every night it was on a different channel.
Right.
And you had to hop around to find out which one.
Oh, you did. Absolutely, yeah. Yep.
Okay. Something comes to mind, guys. This whole money thing didn't just start yesterday. This has been coming for a long time. And I remember reading a quote a while back by Hugh McElhenney. We all remember him, Washington State.
Right. Yep.
Great college All-American, becomes a pro. They asked him in his rookie year, what is the major adjustment between college ball and pro ball? And he said, the pay cut.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Now, you could Google that. He said that, but this improprieties in terms of exchange of money has been going on a long time in amateur sports.
Well, it has, Ralph, and a lot of it was under the table. Right. Players are given all kinds of alumni, support. Guys giving them jobs, guys giving them cars.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been going on for a long time, and that's why I think at some point, they're going to make it above the table, and they're going to start to pay some of these kids, and maybe have to eliminate, some of that booster club money that the head coaches will say, I know nothing about. Well, that's intentionally, because they don't want to know anything about it.
Tell them it's not pro quid or anything like that.
Right. Yep.
Yeah,
I have a new
expression. I have a new expression this week. Thanks to our illustrious president, everything is pro quid.
Right.
But like I say, the money has always been in sports way back. It's not.
I mean, Babe Ruth held out. DiMaggio held out.
Right.
These guys. But before we end, because we started with a mentioning of the Jewish holiday today, there's a wonderful little anecdote I read about. Sandy Koufax wouldn't pitch on Yom Kippur, and Drysdale was pitching. And I guess in his stead, and he was really getting killed in one of those playoff games. And Walter Alston came out to remove him, and he said to Alston, he says, "I bet you wish I was Jewish too."
That's good, David.
Yeah, isn't that a great time?
Yeah,
because he was getting bombed,
right.
Which is unusual for Drysdale.
Yep.
Oh. All right, guys. Great show. Thank you. And Thank you for listening, everybody. It's the Comfortably Zone Network. We talk sports in the zone. We're missing Al Blumkin tonight. We're missing Hal Bach tonight. But George Case III, David Hubler is here, and me, the weak link of the whole network, Ralph Tyko. Thanks, guys. Talk
Good
next
night.
week.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks for listening,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Adios. The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.